The Drathari Dominion was an empire built on conquest. For over 1,000 cycles they had expanded relentlessly, consuming world after world, crushing opposition with overwhelming force. They were not just feared, they were unstoppable. Their war machine had turned entire civilizations into footnotes in history. The mere sight of their fleet sent species into submission. And now, they had set their eyes on the Terran Confederation. Humanity was a relatively young race, having only recently stepped onto the galactic stage. Their technology was considered crude, their fleet small in comparison to the great empires. Yet, they had made a fatal mistake. They had refused to kneel. When the Drathari emissaries arrived demanding surrender, humanity had responded with defiance. No groveling, no negotiations, just a message. Come and find out. To the Drathari, this was insulting beyond measure. Admiral Zalzor, the supreme commander of the Dominion's conquest fleets, had been given a simple order: exterminate them. And so, he gathered the largest invasion force ever assembled in Drathari history. A titanic armada of 10,000 warships, each bristling with firepower capable of reducing entire planets to dust. Their fleet had obliterated entire empires before, and humanity would be no different. As the fleet surged forward, piercing the void between the stars, the Drathari officers prepared themselves for a quick, merciless extermination. The humans had no chance. Their forces were meager, their weapons outdated. There would be no need for diplomacy, no need for prolonged conflict. This would be over in hours. The Sol system lay ahead, humanity's last stronghold. The Drathari ships emerged from the darkness of slip space, their hulls reflecting the light of the distant sun like a swarm of shadowed leviathans converging on their prey. But something was wrong. Their sensors swept the system, searching for the human fleet. Searching for any sign of resistance. There was nothing. No defensive formation. No vast human armada waiting to meet them in battle. No desperate alliance of lesser species rallying to humanity's aid. Just one ship. It drifted in the darkness, positioned between the incoming Drathari fleet and the human homeworld. A single, lone vessel. At first, the Drathari officers thought it was some sort of sensor malfunction, a glitch, but no. Their scans confirmed it. One ship, no reinforcements, no planetary defense grid, no last-ditch resistance force, just this one ship, waiting. It was dark and sleek, its hull a strange matte black, absorbing the starlight rather than reflecting it. It bore no insignia, no clear markings. It did not match the schematics of any known human warship. The bridge of the Vengeance of Stars, the command carrier of the Drathari fleet, fell into a stunned silence. Officers exchanged uncertain glances. This didn't make sense. Admiral Zalzor, standing at the center of the command deck, narrowed his piercing amber eyes. A single ship? Where was the human fleet? Had they fled? No, that was impossible. Humans were stubborn creatures, far too foolish to surrender without a fight. His lips curled into a sneer. They send us one ship? His deep, guttural voice carried across the bridge. Disbelief, contempt, amusement. Murmurs rippled through the ranks of the Drathari officers. Some laughed. Others watched the strange vessel with cold curiosity. A low chuckle came from one of the tactical officers. "Shall I destroy it now, Admiral?" Zalzor raised a clawed hand, silencing him. No, this was too pitiful, too insulting. If this was the best humanity had to offer, then he would not allow them the mercy of a quick death. The humans had sent one ship against an armada? He wanted to see their despair. He opened a fleet-wide transmission, broadcasting on all frequencies. His voice was a deep guttural growl, thick with arrogance. "This is Admiral Zalzor of the Drathari Dominion. You stand alone before the might of an empire. Your defiance is meaningless. Your species will be erased from existence. Your homeworld will burn. You are nothing." Silence. Then, a response. A voice came through the static, calm, composed, utterly unshaken. "This is Captain Elias Voss of the TCS Revenant." Zalzor froze. A murmur swept through the bridge. The Revenant? That was an old human myth, a whispered legend among war fleets. A ghost ship, said to have appeared on battlefields. where it had no right to be. There were stories, unconfirmed reports, fleets that had vanished without a trace, battles that had turned in impossible ways. Nonsense. Folklore. Zalzor let out a cold laugh. You name your ship after a fairy tale human? Do you think that will frighten us? The voice of Captain Voss remained calm, measured. No, Admiral, I think you made a mistake. Zalzor's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward. And what mistake have we made, human? There was a pause. Then, Captain Voss spoke. You assumed I came alone. And then, without warning, the Revenant moved. Not forward. Not backward. It vanished. One moment, it was there. The next, it was gone. No energy signature, no warp field distortion, no electronic trace. Nothing. The entire Drathari fleet froze. The bridge of the Vengeance of Stars fell into stunned silence. The laughter stopped. The arrogance faded. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Zalzor felt something unfamiliar. A cold, creeping sensation slithered up his spine. For the first time in his life, he felt fear. Admiral Zalzor's clawed fingers tightened around the metal railing of his command station, his mind racing through possibilities. The human ship was gone, not destroyed, not cloaked, not warped out of the system. It had ceased to exist in every measurable way. A tactical officer furiously ran scans, his reptilian fingers gliding over the interface. Admiral, we have no readings, no spatial distortions, no phase shifts, nothing on the quantum spectrum. Zalzor's mandibles tightened. Impossible. No technology, not even the most advanced stealth systems in the galaxy, could hide a ship so perfectly. Not from Drathari sensors, designed to detect even the faintest anomalies in space. And yet, the Revenant had vanished. The rest of the fleet still held formation, their ranks stretching in every direction like a vast mechanical storm, ready to rain destruction upon Earth. And yet, a ripple of unease spread through the command. Deck Doc Zalzor turned to his weapons officer. Fire a full spread of energy lances at the last known coordinates, now. A heartbeat later, brilliant spears of crimson energy lanced through the void, slashing across space where the human vessel had been. The sheer heat of the blasts caused spatial distortions, rippling like heat waves. Nothing. It was as if the ship had never been there in the first place. Zalzor bared his fangs, anger bubbling beneath his composed exterior. This was some kind of psychological warfare. A trick. Send out our interceptors, he growled. I want the surrounding space scanned down to the atomic level. That ship is still here. Find it. A swarm of sleek Drathari fighters shot forward, forming intricate search patterns as they spread across the battlefield. Their instruments probed the emptiness, seeking energy trails, gravitational distortions, anything that could betray the Revenant's presence. And then, one of the interceptors exploded. No warning, no sign of an incoming attack, just an instantaneous detonation, a violent burst of flame and debris scattering into the void. Then another, and another. Zalzor's slitted eyes widened as he watched the tactical display. Ships were vanishing from existence, one by one. Their signals disappeared mid-transmission. No weapon signatures, no torpedo trails, nothing to indicate how they were being destroyed. He forced himself to stay calm. Find the point of attack. Trace the trajectory. Admiral, one of the officers stammered, his voice laced with something Zalzor did not like, fear. There are no trajectories. The ships they're just being erased. Zalzor stared at the screen. That wasn't possible. Even the most advanced stealth weapons left some trace. Residual energy, kinetic distortions, something to indicate what had happened. But here, there was nothing. And then, the Revenant reappeared. It materialized in the middle of the Drathari formation like a phantom. No transition, no buildup. One moment, the space was empty. The next, it was there. The warship's black hull seemed to drink in the starlight, its surface eerily smooth, no seams, no visible weapon emplacements. It was utterly silent, an unnatural darkness against the vastness of space. And then, it spoke. Captain. Elias Voss's voice came through every Drathari communication channel simultaneously. Direct, unwavering, unshaken. Admiral, your mistake was thinking you came to conquer. Zalzor's muscles tensed. But you didn't come to conquer, Voss continued. You came to die. At that moment, the Revenant moved. It didn't accelerate. It simply shifted, as if reality itself had bent to place it elsewhere. It flickered across the fleet, faster than thought, reappearing in multiple locations at once before snapping back into a single form. Zalzor barely had time to react before the first Drathari warship ruptured. It was silent at first. No explosion. No energy discharge. One of the massive command cruisers, nearly 3 kilometers in length, suddenly tore apart as if an invisible force had unraveled it at the molecular level. Then came the detonation. A violent chain reaction erupted through the vessel, sending fiery debris crashing into nearby ships, igniting secondary explosions. More warships began falling apart, their hulls disintegrating without cause. No weapon. Strikes. No incoming torpedoes. Zalzor's mind struggled to process it. How? The tactical officer's voice was ragged with disbelief. Admiral, we don't know how it's attacking. We can't track it. Zalzor clenched his jaw. He had never seen a fleet die without ever being fired upon. And then, in the chaos of destruction, a single transmission was intercepted. An encrypted human signal, broadcast between the Revenant and an unknown location. The Drathari officers listened. A second human voice, one not belonging to Captain Voss, crackled through the speakers. Phase 1 complete. We're ready for the next step. Phase 1? Zalzor felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't the full attack. This wasn't even the real battle. This was just the beginning. Admiral Zalzor had never known fear. Not in the countless wars he had waged. Not when he had ordered the annihilation of entire planetary civilizations, their final screams echoing through the void. Not when he had stood against the so-called great powers of the galaxy and watched them crumble before the might of the Drathari Dominion. But now, something primal clawed at his mind. The Revenant had single-handedly unraveled the natural order of war. There were no strategies to counter it, no tactics to predict its movements. It did not obey physics, nor conventional technology. It was something beyond. Zalzor's command deck was filled with the stench of panic. Even his most disciplined officers, the hardened elite of the Drathari fleet, were beginning to falter. Fangs were bared, clawed hands trembled, eyes darted wildly across displays that showed only death. Admiral, enemy ship has repositioned. It's... The officer stopped mid-sentence. He turned, his expression frozen in horror. It's right. Outside. Zalzor's gaze snapped to the viewport, and there it was. The Revenant. No more than 1,000 meters away from the flagship, hovering in the void like a specter from a forgotten nightmare. Its hull was unbroken, untouched by any visible weaponry, and yet fires raged all around it. Massive Drathari warships burned in its wake, their superstructures twisted, their hulls broken as if they had been torn apart by invisible hands. But the Revenant itself? Not a scratch. No weapon strikes had landed. No energy readings emanated from it. It had simply moved, and ships had died. Zalzor's instincts screamed at him to order a retreat. But retreat to where? There was no way to calculate the Revenant's range. It was everywhere and nowhere. It could be right behind them, in front of them, inside of them, and they would never know until it was too late. His second-in-command, Commander Zoreth, was gripping the railing beside him, his scales flushed a sickly pale. Admiral, what do we do? The fact that Zoreth even had to ask sent a fresh wave of rage through Zalzor's body. He had never been questioned in battle, not once. And now, his officers, his own kind, looked at him as if he had no answers. Zalzor straightened. He would not give in to fear. Lock onto that ship and fire every weapon at our disposal, he snarled. A moment of hesitation. Then, his weapons officer nodded sharply. Across the remaining warships of the Drathari fleet, thousands of cannons, swiveled as one, plasma batteries charged, ion lancers aligned, railguns primed. Missile bays groaned open, revealing payloads capable of wiping entire moons from existence. And then, with a single motion, Zalzor slashed his claw downward. Fire. The void erupted into an unholy storm of destruction. Every conceivable form of weaponry poured into the Revenant, their sheer force capable of shattering a planet's crust. The firepower was so intense that it lit up the darkness of space like a newborn star, the heat so great it sent shockwaves through the surrounding debris fields. The Revenant disappeared inside the storm. Its dark hull vanished beneath the sheer onslaught of destruction. For the first time since this nightmare began, Zalzor felt his heart slowly begin to settle. And then, just as quickly, they stopped, because the flames flickered. And there, in the very heart of the firestorm, it remained untouched, unscathed, still watching, still waiting. Something was wrong. The Revenant had not deflected the shots. It had not absorbed them. It had not dodged them. It had simply ignored them, as if they had never been fired. The bridge was silent. Not a single officer spoke. Not a single breath was heard. Zalzor's claws twitched at his sides, his mind trying, desperately, to find an explanation. Nothing was invulnerable. Nothing. He forced his voice to remain steady. Prepare another volley. Focus fire on... A soft thump, a sound that should not have been possible in the vacuum of space. Zalzor's blood ran cold. He turned. The Revenant was no longer outside. It was above them, not in space, inside the ship. Zalzor's breath caught as he looked up. The ceiling above the bridge was no longer metal. It was darkness. A deep, endless void, devoid of stars, devoid of shape, just pure, overwhelming absence. And from that darkness, a shape descended, a humanoid figure, tall, clad in black, no helmet, no visible technology, just two piercing human eyes staring down at him. Zalzor's body refused to move. The bridge crew stood frozen, paralyzed by something far deeper than fear. The figure lowered itself, boots touching the floor without a sound. Captain Elias Voss. He should not be here. He was supposed to be on his ship. He was supposed to be commanding from a distance, and yet he was here. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. The entire command deck shrank under his presence. Zalzor bared his fangs, forcing himself to speak. What are you? Voss didn't answer. He simply raised a single hand, and Zalzor felt the universe tilt. The walls of the bridge shattered like glass, fragments of reality breaking apart, revealing a swirling abyss behind them. The Drathari officers screamed, but their voices were lost in the void, pulled away before they even left their throats. Zalzor fought against it, fought with every ounce of his will, but his body was no longer his own. He was being unmade, not killed, not erased, something worse. The last thing he saw was Voss's cold human eyes staring into his very soul. And then, darkness. There was no bridge. No warship. No battlefield. Admiral Zalzor should not have been conscious. And yet, he was floating, suspended in something impossible. The Drathari warlord had faced death before. He had accepted its cold inevitability, always knowing that one day, in battle or in betrayal, his time would come. But this was not death. It was something worse. His body was gone. His mind? Fragmented, no longer tethered to flesh, no longer bound by the laws of reality as he understood them. And yet he still perceived, still thought. And in that endless nothingness, something else stirred. A presence. No, not just a presence. A force. It was not the Revenant, not the warship that had defied the laws of physics, nor the nightmare that had ignored his fleet's firepower like an afterthought. It was something beyond even that. A weight settled on his mind, crushing in its enormity, its sheer, incomprehensible vastness. It was ancient, something that existed beyond the fabric of time itself, beyond the crude understanding of sentient life. And it was watching him. Zalzor tried to move, tried to scream, but there was nothing to move, nothing to make sound. He was thought without a vessel, an echo of consciousness drifting in an abyss without end. Then, a voice, not spoken, not heard, imposed. It was neither harsh nor gentle, neither organic nor artificial. It simply was. And it said one thing. You were never meant to see this. Zalzor's mind buckled under the weight of those words. They were not a warning, not a threat. They were a fact. Something shifted in the void. He was no longer floating. He was somewhere. The battlefield returned, but it was wrong. Twisted. Distorted. The ruined remnants of his fleet still hung in space, but their shapes were warped, like reflections in shattered glass. The Revenant loomed in the distance, but its edges were fraying. Zalzor tried to breathe, lungs filled with nothing. His claws twitched, though his body was still unreal. Then, motion. Voss stood before him. He had not walked, had not moved. He had simply become present. His eyes, those cold, unfathomably human eyes, studied Zalzor like a scientist examining a specimen. Zalzor tried to speak, but his voice was stolen before the words could form. Voss exhaled, as if he were disappointed. You don't understand yet. Zalzor felt the universe quiver at those words. And then, a memory, not his. A vision that was forced upon him. A world. Cold, harsh. Blue skies, green lands, unremarkable at first glance. But beneath its surface, a species that had been born in struggle, forged in violence, hardened by war after war after war. A species that was never meant to survive, and yet against all odds, it did. Humanity. Zalzor saw them crawl from the dirt, build, destroy, rebuild, again and again. He saw their endless wars, their brutal rise to power, their refusal to be tamed by the laws of the universe. He saw them leave their world, claiming the void as their own. He saw them laughed at, underestimated, crushed under the weight of greater empires, only to rise, stronger, more relentless, more unstoppable than before. He saw the Revenant, not a ship, not a machine, a statement, a culmination of everything humanity had ever been. And then, he understood. Zalzor's consciousness snapped back into the present. He was on the bridge of his warship once more. Or what was left of it. His officers? Gone. His fleet? Gone. The only thing that remained was the Revenant. Silent, waiting. Voss stood before him, arms crossed. There was no malice in his gaze, no cruelty, just certainty. You see it now, don't you? Zalzor trembled. He did. This was not just a war. This was not just a battle. It was a correction. The universe had tried for millennia to silence humanity, to make them fade into the background, to keep them contained, and humanity had denied it, again and again and again, until the universe itself broke. Zalzor fell to his knees. There was no winning this. There had never been. The Revenant had not just destroyed his fleet. It had shattered the illusion of control, and now there was only one truth left. You were never meant to see this. The words echoed through his mind once more. And then, Zalzor knew no more. Darkness. Silence. For the briefest moment, Zalzor thought he had ceased to exist. A cruel mercy, perhaps, after what he had seen. But then, pain. His body was real. Again, his mind no longer untethered from reality. He was alive, but not whole. He was kneeling, breath ragged, on the fractured bridge of his flagship. Sparks flickered from ruptured consoles, casting eerie light against the shattered bulkheads. The air was thick with smoke, heavy with the scent of burnt metal and something worse, something that should not have been there. His warship, a vessel that had once commanded the power of an entire armada, was silent. No voices, no crew, no movement. He was alone. Zalzor forced himself to rise. His claws scraped against the warped floor as he steadied himself, his vision swimming. He looked to the viewport, if it could still be called that. The reinforced transparasteel was fractured like a spider's web, displaying a battlefield that should not have been possible. The wreckage of his fleet remained, but it was wrong. Ships drifted, their forms twisting in ways that defied all logic. Some were frozen mid-explosion, fire and debris suspended in time. Others were folded into impossible angles, their hulls bent as though space itself had turned them into something unrecognizable, and beyond it all, the Revenant waited. Still, silent, but no longer a ship. Zalzor's breath hitched. The vessel had changed, or rather, it had shed its disguise. The illusion of steel and structure was gone, revealing something deeper, older, something that was never meant to be seen. The ship's hull shimmered, no longer solid metal, but a surface that shifted like liquid thought. Symbols, not of any language, but of something primal, something fundamental to reality itself, crawled across its frame like living shadows. And in the center of it all, a single tear in existence, as though space itself had been wounded, bleeding a darkness that swallowed light. Galzor felt his mind strain, the weight of the impossible pressing down on him. This was no warship, it just was a wound in reality. A scar left by something far greater than the Drethari. Greater than humanity. Greater than the empires that ruled the stars. And he had challenged it. Zalzor staggered back. His heart pounded in his chest, a primal terror, clawing at him in ways no battle had ever done. He had thought himself powerful, thought the Drethari Empire was untouchable. He had been wrong. A flicker of movement drew his gaze. A figure stood at the edge of the ruined bridge. Voss. He did not step forward. He became present. There was no arrogance in his stance, no cruelty, just certainty. "You understand now," he said. Zalzor's throat was dry. The words would not come. Voss exhaled, tilting his head as if regarding something distant. "Do you know what happens when a species is pushed beyond its breaking point?" The question was not meant to be answered. Zalzor barely heard him. His gaze was locked on the ship. No, the thing masquerading as a ship. Humanity had not built this. They had become it. Something cold settled in his bones. The wars, the endless conflicts, the countless times the galaxy had sought to end them, they had adapted, survived, evolved, and in doing so, they had touched something that should never have been reached. Voss spoke again. "They wanted to erase us. Again and again, they tried. Empires, coalitions, armadas," his gaze darkened. "So we learned how to exist in the spaces between existence." Zalzor shuddered. He had seen it, felt it. The war had never been about conquest. Not for humanity. Not anymore. It was a correction. Zalzor staggered, his mind grasping at the remnants of his training, his logic, his sanity. But the more he tried to understand, the further it slipped. His people had never stood a chance. He clenched his claws, his breath ragged. "What? What do you want?" Voss regarded him, expression unreadable. And then, in the quiet, he answered, "Nothing." The word was an abyss. Not conquest, not power, not resources. Nothing, because humanity had already won. The Revenant stirred. The darkness at its core pulsed, folding in on itself, space warping, bending. Not through technology, but through something far worse. Zalzor felt it. He had been spared. For now. But this was not mercy. This was a warning. And then, the ship was gone. Not through an FTL jump. Not through any means the Drethari could comprehend. It had simply ceased to be. Zalzor collapsed to his knees. The battlefield was silent. His fleet, his empire, shattered. The war was over. Not because the Drethari had surrendered. Not because they had lost a battle, but because they had been judged and found wanting. Zalzor could not move. The silence stretched around him, vast and suffocating. The war had been real, but the conclusion defied all logic. No retreat. No treaty. No formal surrender. Just absence. The Revenant had vanished, as though it had never existed. Yet, the remnants of its presence lingered. The Drethari warlord felt it in the air, in his mind, in the fractured fabric of his understanding. This was not a victory for humanity. It was something worse. Zalzor forced himself upright. His warship, what was left of it, drifted, powerless. The bridge was cold, exposed to the void where shattered hull plating had once sealed them away from the abyss. Emergency systems flickered, struggling against the ruin, casting sporadic beams of light across the wreckage. He could see bodies now. Drethari warriors, his warriors, reduced to lifeless husks. Some had been burned, others broken beyond recognition, but it was their expressions that made something inside him coil in fear. Terror. Not the terror of battle, not the fear of death, but the absolute, unrelenting horror of knowing. They had seen it. They had understood, but only in the final moments before their minds had been erased. Zalzor clenched his fists. He could not afford to crumble now. He was the last, the only one left to bear witness. Something crackled in his ear, a transmission. Faint. Command. Responding? Any survivors? The voice was Drethari, distant and distorted. A beacon in the void. Zalzor swallowed the bile rising in his throat and pressed the control embedded in his wrist. I am alive. His own voice was barely a rasp. This is High Warlord Zalzor. Report. Static. Then, Warfleet destroyed. Human forces, gone. We are gathering remains. Casualties, immeasurable. His mandibles clicked in frustration. Gone. The word held no satisfaction, no relief. Not defeated. Not dead. Gone. Zalzor struggled to keep his voice steady. How many of us remain? A pause. Then, reluctantly, fewer than 1,000, across the entire fleet. The weight of the number settled over him like a crushing tide. The Drethari war machine had spanned thousands of warships, millions of warriors. It had been an empire's might, a force meant to bring entire systems to their knees. Now it was less than a whisper. Zalzor exhaled slowly, his mind clawing for reason, for something to make sense. Prepare evacuation protocols, he ordered. We regroup at the outer colonies. All surviving command units will convene for a full... The transmission cut out. Not static. Not interference. Just silence. Zalzor's blood ran cold, and then, a whisper. Not from the comms. Not from his surroundings. From inside his mind. You were never meant to survive. His vision blurred. The bridge shifted around him, not physically, but as though space itself had become unmoored from reality. Zalzor knew this presence. It had been there, unseen, during the battle. It had watched. Judged. He reached for his weapon, a futile instinct. But the moment his claws touched the hilt, reality snapped back into place. The voice was gone. The warlord stood in the remains of his bridge, alone once more, with nothing but the echoes of a war that had ended before it had truly begun. Zalzor inhaled sharply. This was no ordinary enemy. Humanity had become something else. Something that did not conquer. Something that did not destroy. Something that simply erased, and the galaxy would never be the same. Zalzor stood motionless in the broken remains of his warship, staring into the endless void beyond the shattered hull. The stars were different now, or perhaps it was his mind that had changed, fractured by something he could neither define nor escape. He had fought countless wars, led brutal campaigns, witnessed empires rise and fall beneath the relentless march of the Drethari war machine. Yet, never before had he felt this emptiness. His warriors had been slaughtered, his fleets erased, his people reduced to a fraction of what they had been. And the one responsible, the Revenant, was gone, as though it had never existed. But Zalzor knew the truth. It had been real, and it had left him alive for a reason. A deep tremor rolled through what remained of the vessel. Its structural integrity had reached its limits. Soon it would break apart completely, its pieces swallowed by the abyss. He activated his emergency beacon, hailing any remaining Drethari ships. A flickering blue interface displayed the bleak reality of his situation. Few survivors, no remaining high command, and no clear path forward. The Drethari Empire was not merely defeated, it had been redefined. A transmission cracked through the static. One of his surviving officers, High Warlord, the fleet. It is no longer a fleet. The voice sounded strained, raw. It is remnants. Less than 1,000 of us across the entire sector. We are The voice hesitated. "We are no longer an empire." Zalzor clenched his mandibles. He already knew this, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way he was not prepared to face. "Then we learn," he growled, forcing steel back into his voice. "We survive." Survival. The one constant across all species. The Drathari had once believed survival meant domination. That to endure, they had to crush the weak beneath their might. And yet it was humanity that had endured. Not by force alone. Not through mere violence. Through understanding. Through something deeper. Something Zalzor still could not fully grasp. The Revenant had fought like no other warship in history. It had not overwhelmed them with superior numbers or brute strength. It had used something else. Something so far beyond conventional warfare that it broke the rules of battle itself. Terror? No, that wasn't it. It was acceptance. Humanity had looked upon the Drathari war machine, the might of an empire that had crushed dozens of civilizations, and simply decided it no longer existed. Not through arrogance, not through ignorance, but through a fundamental shift in how they viewed conflict itself. What was war if the enemy refused to fight in the way you understood? What was an empire if its enemies refused to acknowledge its power? Zalzor exhaled, his breath fogging the cold air. He had thought himself a conqueror, but now he was nothing more than a student. And the lesson was simple. The Drathari would never go to war with humanity again. Because war, as they knew it, was over. And in its place, something new had emerged. Something inevitable. Something unstoppable. Humanity. The future.